recurrent theme in the teachings of the Forest Ajahns is that all the steps of the practice are of a piece. In other words, having attained awakening, they don't say anything disparaging about the early steps in the practice, that they're only elementary and that you have to get past them in order to move on to the more important stuff. As Budun put it, he says that the Dharma is one thing, all clear through. Or as Ajahn Mahabua once said, that one of the realizations when you hit awakening is that it's everything is the same teaching, starting from generosity and gratitude all the way up through awakening. It's all basically the same teaching, just different levels of subtlety, but it's the same principle. And you'd see this in their lives. Even having attained awakening, they just didn't sit around and say, well, now that their own job was done, they didn't have to do anything more. They were very industrious people. Ajahn Fuang, even when he was sick, would get out every evening and do some chore around the monastery. When doing construction work, he wasn't up to doing any of the heavy construction, but at the very least he would go out and he'd pick up the thrown-away nails. He was very frugal, very meticulous. And so it's important to keep this principle in mind, that the practice here is a practice of generosity, it's a practice of gratitude, it's a practice of goodwill and kindness, all the way through. Look at the Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths. I mean, what are they motivated by if not goodwill? The desire for an end of suffering. The desire for happiness that doesn't place any burdens on anyone else. And you look at his teaching career. Anywhere where there was someone who's ready to learn the Dharma, he would go there. And in those days that meant going on foot. He traveled all over northern India on foot just to teach. Even the very last day of his life, he knew there was one more person he had to teach before he entered total nirvana. And even though he was suffering from dysentery, he walked all the way to Kusinara, full day's walk, because there was that one more person, Supada, that he had to teach. So what this means in our practice is that we should value all levels of the practice. It's not that you do the elementary levels and then you drop them and you move on to the higher ones. It's just you add more and more levels of subtlety to your practice, more levels of generosity, goodwill, gratitude. The Buddha started his teaching in a very basic, mundane right view, teaching on karma. And the way he introduced karma was the teaching, with two teachings actually, one on gratitude and one on generosity. He starts out by saying generosity is real. The gifts you give benefit you and benefit the other person. It's something of real value. And you can think of the whole practice all the way through the abandoning of greed, anger, and delusion as an act of generosity, an act of goodwill. The less greed, anger, and delusion you have, the better off not only you are, but better off everybody is. Think of all the suffering you've inflicted, not only on yourself, but also on other people, through your anger, through your greed, through your delusion. You give these things up, not only for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the people around you as well. And then the teaching on gratitude. The Buddha focused this on the gratitude we owe our parents. That the good they've done for us is something it really is a debt. All that your mother went through just to give birth to you. You think about that. In Thailand, they have a chant for every ordination. It's traditional that you have a chant before the ordination. They hire somebody to come in and it chants for a couple hours. about all the hardships your parents went through to raise you, to remind you. In Thailand, there's a very strong sense that you ordain as an act of gratitude to your parents. You dedicate the merit to them. So right before the ordination, they remind you exactly how big that debt is that you owe them. And if the chant lasts for 4 hours, 3.5 of the hours about the pains your mother went through and being pregnant with you. You're fortunate she didn't abort you. She could have done that. You're fortunate that your parents didn't abandon you after you were born. They could have done that as well. They went to all that trouble to raise you, to teach you how to speak, to teach you how to walk, sit up, whatever. It's a huge debt of gratitude you owe them. And as the Buddha said, gratitude is a sign of a good person. Because if you don't appreciate the good that other people have done to you, it's very unlikely you're going to do good for anybody at all. And John Fuang, if you notice that someone didn't have gratitude for their parents, didn't want to associate with that person. See, if they can't appreciate their parents, what are they going to appreciate? It's an essential quality for the practice. And it carries you all the way through. This is why we're generous. This is why we practice the precepts. We're harmless. This is why we meditate, again, so we can train the mind so that it's harmless. Not only harmless, that it has extra energy. If you're not weighing yourself down with greed, anger, and delusion, you find you have a lot more energy to help other people. And even though there's that popular conception about Theravada as being a selfish path, as someone once said who had studied Buddhism both in Japan and Thailand, he didn't see the Thai people were any more selfish than the Japanese. In fact, the other way around. You look at the example of the Buddha in the Pali Canon. This is not a selfish example. Sariputta, Moggallana, they extremely helpful when they, not only with other monks, but also with lay people, teaching them. You look at the rules in the Vinaya, the rules for the monks to look after the monastery. This is basically the monastery is just pure generosity. Everything, if you were to open your eyes right now and look around, everything we have here is somebody's gift. And as for the monks, the longer you live as a monk, the more and more the very bones of your body are the results of somebody's generosity. They say that after 7 years, all the cells in your body have been changed. So once a monk has hit 7 years, his whole body is somebody else's gift. So you've got to use it wisely. Use it with generosity. Use it in the same spirit with which it was given to you. And as for the monastery, there are lots of rules for the monks to look after the place. The Buddha encouraged the monks to be clean, to be careful in the way they use things. To put a lot of energy into looking after other people's generosity. That's what it comes down to. In the forest tradition, there's a very strong tradition of keeping alive the protocols that the Buddha gives in the Kandakas. There's a textbook that the monks are supposed to study on the Vinaya. It's written by a city monk back in the beginning of the 20th century, and he had cut back on a lot of the rules. This textbook was never popular with the forest tradition. They preferred an older book which went into a lot of detail, particularly on the 14, what they call the 14 protocols, most of which deal with looking after the monastery. When you come to a monastery, how you're supposed to look after it. When you leave, how you're supposed to leave it in good shape. And while you're there, how you keep it clean. A lot of energy goes into that. because a lot of energy went into giving the monastery in the first place. So the Buddha never discouraged people from being generous. He never discouraged people from being energetic. And John Suat liked to make this point again and again. There's no place where the Buddha encourages laziness. Even though he teaches contentment, it's contentment with what you've got, the material things you already have, so that you can devote yourself to building on that, and especially so you can devote yourself to the training of the mind. But contentment doesn't mean that if you find that the place is dirty, you leave it dirty. Contentment means, okay, if you just have a little shack, you're content with your shack, but you make it a clean shack. You keep it in good repair. Uttana Sambhada is the word in Pali. It means that you take initiative. You're energetic. And this translates into your meditation. The sort of person who's energetic in keeping the place clean tends to be more energetic in meditating. One time when I was in Bangkok, I'd arrived there for my visa business, and so I was in the midst of cleaning my room, sweeping it, wiping it down. And a Western monk who'd just come back from Burma knew that I might be there, so he'd come around to check out, to see if I was there. Sure enough, I had just come in. And as soon as he saw me wiping down the floor, he says, "You Thai monks, all you do is spend your time keeping the place clean. Over in Burma, we have other people to do that for us." And you looked at the quality of his meditation, you could see him. He was used to having other people doing things for him, and his meditation got to be that way too. This is a strong tradition in the forest tradition, starting from Ajahn Mun. He's very diligent in keeping his place clean. You go to his place in the forest, and it wasn't just some hovel. Everything was neatly swept. Everything was in its proper place. As Ajahn Fuang said, even the rags for wiping the feet at the base of the stairs to his little hut, if they were torn, he would sew them. If they were dirty, he would wash them. And this quality of being energetic and meticulous translated into his meditation as well. So don't think that the elementary practices are just for people on an elementary level. They're for everybody. That's how everybody gets started, and then you build on them. Doesn't mean you abandon them, you build on them. You include more and more subtle levels. But the basic levels stay there as well. Until, as the texts say, generosity is no longer just something you do for your own sake or for the sake of other people. It becomes just a natural expression of the mind. All the steps of the practice become a natural expression of the mind once it's fully trained.